We're on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum about to speak with Secretary Butch Abad. Secretary Abad, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Maria.
What is the WEF, the World Economic Forum, been like for you?
Well, it works both ways. It's been a great platform to tell the world about the Philippine narrative. In so short a period of time, so much progress is happening in many fronts. And many are surprised. And many say it's a miracle, but as Secretary Jimenez would insist, there's a lot of hard work there. That can be explained. And,
yes.
This past several days have been occasions for us to explain why. At the same time, I think the perspective from the outside is going to help us. And, our favorite pastime in this country is self-flagellation. You cannot seem to appreciate, the progress being made, particularly, and I was even myself surprised, coming from these international aid organizations and telling us, my God, you've been hit by a typhoon that is unprecedented, but the way you have responded as a country is unimaginable. We've never seen that kind of a response, Not just government, but especially the people. The way you've come together to deal with this crisis is, for them, is something that they've not seen.
So it seems like on the macroeconomic level, the Philippines is doing very, very well, but then here domestically, you're hounded by the corruption scandal, by the airport. How do you put this together as the man, as a person who has to work with all of it?
Well, we're managing a difficult transition here. You have to, the problem always with, especially our domestic critics is they compare what we have done to what we ought to be doing. But that's important.
Yes.
You can see that. But to make it balanced, you have to look at also where we are coming from.
Right.
And how we have gone from where we're coming from to where we are right now. And, when you look at that, then you appreciate things better.
You were put on the spot yesterday by one of the reporters who actually you were talking about being transparent and the good governance of the administration. And then he said, you've been named.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
Well, I have flatly denied that. It's a ridiculous charge. And if there is an investigation, I would even look forward to that being done so that once and for all, my name gets cleared, because I'm, my conscience is, clear about this thing. And but I said yesterday that this whole expose was in fact exposed by government. Yeah. And it would have been easy for government to just simply cover this up. No, the government went on to expose it. And not just that, the president gave instructions to the Secretary of Justice and the NBI to investigate it and follow where the evidence leads you, and let the axe fall where it should. And I think that directive remains. And I think people should appreciate that, because if the president had not created an environment where this can be possible, I don't think people will come forward. In the past, people would say, "Oh, it's useless because it's not going to go anywhere." But I think now, because the possibility, because they've seen that happen to the former president, to a chief justice of a Supreme Court, to a national ombudsman, they see a better chance now of getting the big fish.
So let's talk about the big fish, this whole process, being transparent about it has positives and negatives. It's great because the public is part of it and it has restored investor confidence to a degree, but isn't there a point where too much then will degrade investor confidence? Where is the point where the Senate, for example, will lose credibility as all of this comes together. Do you think about that?
Well, it's a combination of many factors. For example, people now are impatient because they want to see people go to jail. But that phase of the work is not within our control because that's the judiciary that we're talking about. So everybody now is looking at that because I think the biggest tragedy is if nothing comes out of this exposés and this investigation. So I think the very first thing that we have to do as a society is find closure on these cases.
You think that will happen in the next 2 years?
Well, we hope so, and we'd like to see that happen before we leave government. I think we owe it to the people after the demonstration of public outrage and making impatient, persistent demands on government. I think that's their right, and the government responded to the extent that it could. So I think all the institutions in society must respond to that, and that's why they appeal to the judiciary to put a closure to this as soon as possible.
What's the impact in the future, do you think, on foreign direct investments, on investors looking at the Philippines?
Well, what is critical and what has been lacking for so long a time is credibility. People are looking at, is this government serious? Is it going to be consistent? Are we really reaching a regime of predictability and stability here? That's why they held off for some time.
Yes.
They were not coming in for some time. But now when they're seeing that, not just leadership, but policies, processes, and institutions are actually moving in that direction, now they're seeing. Because a credit rating upgrade is not just a financial and economic assessment.
Yes.
It's a social as well as a political assessment
Yes.
of the country's ability to fulfill its commitment.
Yeah.
And in our case, the fiscal consolidation commitment is very critical. And you're seeing that over the past 4 cycles, we've kept within our deficit to GDP ratio, and you're seeing a consistent drop in the debt to GDP, and that's why every year my interest payments are falling. So they're seeing this. It's consistent, and they think that all the necessary policies are in place to make sure that that goes on even beyond this term.
So let me ask you about what you're doing in DBM. Deciding to throw out PDAF in the middle of everything is very difficult. Discovering institutionalized corruption and then all of a sudden stopping it without any system in place can be catastrophic. How do you keep money flow going? What system do you put in place? What did you do and what are you doing now? It's like changing the wheels on a moving bus.
Well, I guess the very first thing that we have to say is that it's good for example, the Supreme Court to define the bounds of, each branch's jurisdiction, so that even if there are overlaps there, you'd be able to understand why.
Yes.
It's a complex question that you're asking me, Maria.
Yes.
Because, with poverty is still a significant problem.
Yes.
The demands on political leadership continues to be heavy. When legislators go home to their places, the people in the communities know that the most effective representation that they can get is from their legislators.
Correct.
Because they're the ones who are involved in the national budget.
Yes.
So you don't go to your mayor,
Yeah.
you don't go to your governor.
Right.
If you really want, especially if there's a strategic infrastructure like a farm-to-market road or an irrigation project, you naturally go to your legislator because
Right.
they are the ones who craft the budget. So and that pressure continues.
Right.
So, this very simplistic notion that legislators should have nothing to do with the budget, I think is wrong.
It's the same way in the United States, right?
Right.
Part of it is that getting elected gives you the privilege to also decide where things go. That's part of the power of
Right.
it.
Well, sometimes it can be distorting. Like, for example, you insist on a on a huge irrigation project, but
Okay.
you're not a rice growing.
Correct,
You know,
correct.
so those things.
But it's also a way of decentralizing the
Right.
the disbursement of funds, for example.
Right, right.
So what do you do without?
Well, that's why, I think it's important also to state that we have here a state that's been very firm and emphatic about, we should spend within our means.
Yes.
We should spend according to priorities. That's why we said social protection, social services, especially basic education, public health, social housing.
Okay.
And then in terms of expanding the economy, infrastructure development, focus on tourism and modernization of agriculture and the revival of certain manufacturing industries. Outside of that, we should not be spending money. And third, we should be spending, keeping in mind that we are looking for measurable outcomes.
Okay.
Because if we cannot measure,
Okay.
what we're spending on, then it will be difficult for us to say that we've spent right.
So these are the new boundaries you've put on this,
Right.
right? But
Right.
taking away something, changing the system completely right now has the dangers. How do you make sure then that the money is dispersed in a way that doesn't allow the same thing that happened with our GDP in 2011, right? 2011 or 2012, the beginning
2011,
of 2012. Yes,
2011.
where we shrank it because we
Well,
didn't spend enough.
No, but that was deliberate in a way.
Correct, because of DPWH.
The president was saying, we may put a lot more money, but
Yes.
if the pail is full of holes,
Yes.
then there's no way you get that money spent
Okay.
meaningfully. So we said, we don't mind slowing down a bit, but let's look at the leakages.
We'll fix the system.
Let's look at the bottlenecks, Let's look at the wastage,
Okay.
And let's make sure that we're putting the money where we should be putting. So we slowed down for a while. And you saw the effect right
Yes.
after. It was 6.8,
Correct,
7.2.
It turned out to have been a good decision.
Oh,
Short-term
exactly.
pain,
Exactly.
long-term goal. But
Yeah.
now, again, with this money flow stopped, now you've put these restrictions around it. How is it going?
Well, it's going well, but that is not to say that we have done the job. We're not even halfway here. We're not even halfway. That's why, we have instituted a process by which we, move into a regime which is called performance-informed budgeting.
Okay.
By the end of this year, we should be moving into a regime where we will be checkless and cashless, at least cashless 80%,
Wow.
And at the same time, we will remove many of the requirements for releases of funds. Like this year, we started a process where the budget itself, once enacted into law, becomes the release document. So all these SAROs
Are done.
will be.
But Secretary, about what do you replace PDAF with?
Well, we've been telling the legislators that the Supreme Court did not stop you from engaging the executive and determining, what are priority social and economic services that your districts need. In the budget preparation stage,
So
in the budget authorization phase, you're certainly empowered to and have the authority to determine, what should be priorities because you're Congress.
So you're pushing them further up in the production chain. Essentially, you're telling them get in before the budget goes, and then the money will go directly to the agencies. Is that correct?
Right. Well, I mean, perhaps I can say this.
Yeah, please.
I think Congress has not really, because of its, too much focus on meeting constituency needs, it has not been able to exercise fully its power. Its power over the purse, its power of oversight.
Yes.
Its power to pass legislation. And so I think, I hope it moves in that direction. I think Congress would now have to look at, all the variety of available measures within its hands to be able to meet their constituency needs, but at the same time look at the broad requirements of the country. Because sometimes people think that there is you cannot reconcile meeting constituency needs
Correct.
with the needs of the country. You can.
Yes,
You
yes.
can. That's possible. And
Could
in
you say-
fact, this unprecedented investments in social services meets a lot of
Yeah.
their constituency needs.
So would you say that it in a way can professionalize this, make them actually do the work, and at the same time remove patronage-driven or feudalistic?
Well, patronage is a fundamental structural problem that has deep historical colonial roots.
Yes.
And I'll be lying to you if I say at the end of this term, we would have been able to dismantle that. No, that's not going to happen too soon. Perhaps when we've been able to significantly reduce poverty and, be able to create a robust middle class, then that's when I can tell you, Maria, that, we are moving in a direction where, patronage will be a thing of the past.
So this thing that you are changing right now, what you are replacing PADAF with, how would you describe it? How do you prevent another PADAF?
Yeah, well, this will require for the legislators to work harder because they will have to work with us and say, for example, for 2015, the president has very clearly said we must continue expanding
Yes.
CCT, or the Conditional Cash Transfer Program.
Yes.
Of course, the instinct of legislators is, since they're always conscious about renewing their mandates,
Yes.
is to be able to be identified with these projects and do
Correct.
as much as possible, be able to control the direction, But we tell them, there are clear parameters for providing and extending or expanding CCT. For example, we have to make sure that we abide by the National Household Targeted Survey,
Yes.
which determines who should receive. But certainly, you can work with us in determining that those listed in the NHTS are really poor people in your places.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, so this is the kind of working relationship that we're trying to engage them with, because their inputs are helpful because they know their jurisdictions.
districts.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So how would you describe the state of corruption in the Philippines today?
Well, it's a structural problem. It's related to the continuing dominance of a few clans holding oligarchic control over political and economic resources, and promoting a culture of patronage, because I think patronage breeds dependency.
Yes.
And dependency is rooted in poverty. And so unless we decisively deal with the problem of poverty, then corruption cannot be dramatically reduced. So I think there is a direct correlation between how deeply embedded patronage is to the problem of corruption.
So is it safe to say you're tackling this corruption at a high level? It's slowly coming down, and it does hog the headlines. At the same time, you're tackling the poverty issue. Doesn't get as much headlines.
Right. So that's why it cannot be a technical or a management problem.
Yes.
Because
No,
many
agreed,
efforts
agreed.
at reducing corruption see it as a management problem. But it really has more complications than simply being a development issue or a management
correct
issue.
me if I'm wrong again, but it seems like what you've done now, where we are right now, is we've thrown out a system that gave money, and it was corrupt, but
Right.
it was institutionalized corruption.
Right.
We threw that out. We're putting in a new system. It's got to be messier than before. I mean, is it messier than before? And how do you keep it moving in a way that's efficient? The term that's always used is creative destruction. I mean, how would you describe your creative destruction
Well,
right now?
I said yesterday that for any government to succeed in the transition, it has to be a disruptive state. You disrupt many things. You disrupt many things that people have learned to do over the so many years. And I think the classic example is PDAF.
Correct.
And so it becomes difficult and confusing when you're in the process of trying now to define what should replace PDAF in the sense of how do you meet constituency needs without necessarily, creating opportunities for leakages and corruption. That is really the challenge, and that's where creativity and a good working relationship, because we cannot alienate Congress.
Absolutely. Have you found the answer?
Well, we are in that process. This is our first budget where we
Yes.
have to provide for those needs that
Right.
have been taken out because of the declaration of PDAP as unconstitutional and illegal. Yeah.
So again, macroeconomically, the results are there, and we're seeing the transparency that's there. There's the big question about the administration, though, again, is as it exposes, or as institutionalized corruption is exposed, the question about administration allies. And that's hounded, I think, the administration since the beginning of the PDAF scandal.
Yeah.
It seems focused on non-LP members or the opposition.
I think
What would you say about
at
the
the end of the
perception?
day, the most objective way of dealing with this is, let the evidence be presented. And as the president said, if the evidence is there, and we've not hidden anything here, and the Secretary of Justice has repeatedly come out and saying we are willing to present all of these things and let the ombudsman decide whether there is in fact basis for filing the cases. So I think at the end of the day, that's what's most important. And
Yes.
and the government is not getting in the way of the production of those evidence.
So Secretary Abad, former Chief Justice Renato Corona said, everyone is doing it, I'm just being targeted. And to some degree, that's the same argument we're hearing from the senators who've already been charged. Is that correct? Is it a matter for sources putting it? Have the allies been spared, at least time-wise, at this point?
Well, there were two critical events here. The illegal detention case that led to Louis,
Ben Hurluy, yes.
Ben Hurluy exposing his files.
Yes.
That's not the government's action.
Correct.
The special audit of the Commission on Audit, which started in May
Yes.
of 2010, we were not in power then. We just continued that investigation. So these were two events that converged.
Yes.
And then brought forth this, all these names and amounts and documents. And
Yes.
that's what we've been working on, the Department of Justice and the government and the Ombudsman. So, I mean, it's not as if, from the very start we were driving this thing. No.
Yes.
But because these are out there now, the President has been very clear that we should allow the process to proceed. And whoever it may hit, then so be it.
So again, the last question is still going back to that. How much is politics getting in the way of the process? I mean, you have less than 2 years before the end, and then we've got elections again, both in the way you do things, in the perception of people. How much of a role? Certainly in Yolanda, we saw a very high-profile fight between, two people and I know. I mean, again, what role and how can you minimize politics in something like this? Because certainly there have been great gains, and that's one of the areas that people are looking at.
I think you should qualify it when you say politics. I think what you're referring to is partisanship.
Partisanship, correct.
Partisanship,
You're right.
yeah. Because I think politics is useful in many ways. I mean, if you have a strong mandate from the people, and you compensate that
Which
by
you have used,
following
yes.
through with your promises, then you have what's the situation now where there is a high level of trust and approval between government and the constituency. But when the corrosive effect of partisanship gets in the way, that's when it becomes confusing, distracting, and unproductive, and that's what we want to try to avoid.
Are we avoiding it? Are you avoiding it now?
Well, coming from, as I said, and I must stress again, Maria, this is a period of transition. The elements fighting reform are still strong. The countervailing forces that want to make sure that the reforms are deeply embedded in our institutions are still weak. And that's why this state is performing a critical role in insulating, these countervailing forces and our institutions, so that, for example, regulatory agencies cannot be captured. It's critical for that state to continue providing that leadership, and that's what the Aquino administration has been doing.
Fantastic. Your last thoughts moving forward now.
Well, we are at the cusp of, really saying goodbye to boom and bust economic growth. We are at a point where we can actually dramatically change the culture of our politics. And it's a difficult transition. It can be confusing, but I'd like to assure our people, that the state is very determined, it's very clear about priorities for the next 2.5 years, which is really make sure, spatially, sectorally, that the inclusive development trust really creates more stakeholders for this reform. And that's really why, Maria, the 2016 election is important. How we define it is critical because, as I said yesterday, if it is going to be a business as usual elections, then we would have missed, defining it as an election that is crucial for continuity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We've been speaking with DBM Secretary Butch Abad at the sidelines of the World Economic Forum. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us.